welcome to everyone and have a very good afternoon today. I'm very of a heartfelt welcome from my side to do today's webinar. For the past month, I think companies across Europe, but also even beyond across the world, have been somewhat expecting a potential postponement of the EUDR. And we also spoke to several stakeholders that actually expected this time to be able to adapt to the complex requirements of the regulation. But then last week's announcement on Tuesday from the EU Commission of the so-called EUDR proposal for amendment made especially one thing quite clear, and that's that the clock is still ticking. There might be no postponement, and the EUDR is moving forward. And this means especially that companies in the affected EUDR sectors, so with EUDR relevant products, will have to understand very soon what's changing, what might the implications of this proposal be for the processes, how to stay compliant, but also what are the opportunities and also the risks that lie ahead. And actually today we are here, especially for addressing those points. Together we will try our best to actually unpack what this EU's latest proposal really means for companies. And from our side, Niels Pöhl, our head of public affairs, will walk us through what to expect next from the EU institutions. And then Sebastian Dünz, a salary partner from the law firm Taylor Wessing, will do his best to shed light also on the legal implications of this new proposal. Last but not least, I will then take over and explore what does this really mean on an operational level for companies and how can you leverage but also overcome like the new requirements from the proposal. Before I I would quickly hand over to Sebastian Dünz to quickly introduce yourself and to just like explain in 1 or 2 minutes what your experience with EUDR is. And yeah.
First of all, thanks a lot for the invitation, Fabio and Prewave. My name is Sebastian Dünz. I'm salary partner at the Düsseldorf office of Taylor Wessing. I'm working as a commercial lawyer with a strong focus on supply chain compliance. In particular, that's the implementation of the German Supply Chain Act, but recently for the last 1.5 years also advising a lot on EUDR. I'm also head of our German ESG group, which connects different ESG topics from all kind of legal fields and combines them to provide a holistic ESG legal advice.
Thank you very much. And also thank you very much for your participation. Always a pleasure to run these webinars with you. And next, Niels, if you could quickly introduce yourself.
Thank you, Fabio. Yes, my name is Niels Pöhl. I'm head of public affairs for Prewave since July and basically representing Prewave towards the political stakeholders here in Brussels. My experience with EUDR is a little bit longer than that. I used to work for CLEPA, the European Association of Automotive Suppliers, and then EUDR was one of the topics that I covered there as well, helping our members navigate the uncertainty of EUDR. So in that sense, not much has changed.
Thank you very much, also to you too. Before we jump into the content, I just want to clarify some logistical settings. So in general, this webinar will be recorded. We are going to share with all the participants both the slides and also the webinar recording after this webinar. And we will also have a dedicated Q&A session in the end of this webinar, where we will do our best to cover all the questions that were raised throughout the webinar in the question section. So feel free to pose as many questions as you want to. We will do our best to also answer those already during the webinar, but for those that we will not be able to cover, we will just do it in the end of this session. And now let me quickly actually introduce you to today's agenda. And as I mentioned beforehand, we will shed light on actually what we can expect as the next steps, or what we can just like expect from the timeline from the EU institutions. This introduction will be done by Niels. Then Sebastian will take over and explain the legal implications of this amendment proposal. So what does it mean from a legal perspective? And I will round it up by explaining what does it mean from an operational perspective. Last but not least, as just mentioned, we are going to have an open discussion where we just will do our best to cover any open questions that might arise. Here, obviously, I have to add there are some unclarities still, as quite typical for the EUDR law, but we will definitely do our best to cover as much as possible. And with that, I would actually hand over to Niels, who will give you some insights on the EUDR timeline and the big picture.
Yes, perfect. Thank you, Fabio. And I think we can also go to the next slide. So before we dive really into the content, I think it's very, and the timeline, etc. It's good to assess really that, to appreciate that we are in a quite unique position, because basically, yeah, what we've seen very often is that the Commission quite late in the game comes with a delay, or in this case an enforcement grace period. That is not necessarily new, but what is at least for me, not something that I've seen a lot, is that actually also quite late in the process they decide to introduce legislate or legal changes into really the text that go a little bit further. So basically the Commission is trying with one big sweep to solve a political problem and a technical problem. The political problem being that EUDR affected the European agricultural and forestry sectors more than was foreseen. So now they try to introduce this dedicated regime for micro and small primary operators. And on the other hand, there was a technical problem due to the fact that companies that, for instance, source rubber, then process that rubber into something else, and then make maybe a tire out of it, have different products that fall in scope of EUDR, and they interpreted the law quite strictly, and therefore there was a risk that they would issue due diligence statements for every step in the process, and that would lead to a volume of due diligence statements that would overwhelm the IT process. So that is why we then see now in the text, quite a new big category around the downstream operators and requirements. But that, of course, always creates as a problem that as soon as you create legal text, there will be discussions around interpretations, and that creates a little bit unclarity then whether something gets in the end the political support, yes or no. So that I think we need to be honest about. But let's have a look at some of the parameters that can help us assess actually the likely outcomes now of the uncertainty in which we find ourselves. So I think the best way to do that is actually to, first of all, be very aware of the tight timeline in which we operate. And I think we can go to the next slide. So if you actually look at last year when the delay was announced, which of course was a very simple amendment because it was just a time difference, then the Commission actually introduced it on the 2nd of October. And it took until the 3rd of December to have political clarity, and it took until the 23rd of December to have legal certainty. So that was quite a long time frame, actually. And now we are 19 days behind that schedule. Now the Commission only published the proposal on the 21st of October. So last year, what lengthened the process was basically the fact that member states agreed quite quickly, but Parliament insisted on the introduction of a no-risk category, and therefore a negotiation between Parliament, member states, and the Commission basically was needed. And I think we all see now that we are under a very tight schedule. We may have new committee meetings early November, so we need to see where the dust falls, but it's very clear that there is actually very limited time to discuss significant changes to the text. So that is, I think, a first ingredient to consider. But maybe we can go to the next slide to go a little bit more deeper into what actually has been the response on the Commission proposal, and what are the most likely scenarios now. So I think it's very good to take into account that even when we see headlines maybe about member states pushing back or members of Parliament being very critical, that the time is a factor, but also the fact that the European Commission is the only one with the right of initiative. So at the moment, there is only one proposal, and that's the proposal that the Commission has put on the table. And the only other alternative on the table at the moment is the law as it is. So that is the situation in which we find ourselves. Yes, you could say even that the Commission is saying to member states and parliament, take it or leave it. In an implicit way. No, they haven't said that explicit, but you could interpret the situation as such. We also know that member states and parliament never like to hear that and are going to push back. And that is what you are now already seeing behind closed doors, so that both in the Agricultural Council this week, but also last week in the Environmental Council, member states were very critical. They requested more time to digest. They were bringing up maybe a no-risk category. They were maybe bringing up a real delay, but nobody so far said that they are going to oppose it, oppose the Commission, and we really have to see. It would really be quite a step to actually do so for the reasons I just mentioned. And in Parliament, we see that some have already signaled support. So the Social Democrats and the Liberals seem to be biting their mouths together and potentially will support it. And the big question is whether the Conservative EPP will support the text, or whether they, like last year, will create a bit longer uncertainty by insisting on a no-risk category. So basically, these two institutions have two decisions to take. First of all, is time. Because if they are going to, unless they create more time, they will not be really able to introduce any new changes to the text because of the limited time that there will be to actually agree on it and then to legally review it. So they can either decide to really make a very big push to force the Commission to make a pivot again and announce a further delay. But this would be for the Commission very painful. It would be the third or the fourth time that they have to change their position. So as well, Parliament and Council will know that is a very big ask from the Commission. And the Commission probably also has anticipated this and for a reason decided to come with the proposal that they want to come. So I think they are willing to spend some political capital on sticking to their guns that this is the proposal. And the other big question is the political question around the no-risk category, a very strong wish from the EPP. Also, some member states are bringing it up, but the Commission has very good reasons not to want it. One is WTO compliance, and the other reason is that they then maybe have to make a distinction between some EU member states that are no risk and other EU member states that are risk category. And that is not a nice and comfortable position to be in. So this all makes, and that is very difficult and with a lot of uncertainty, but that there is a big chance that in the end, the base case is, I think, that the Commission proposal will, with a little bit noise, in the end be accepted and get across the finish line. So I think that is the base case to take into consideration. But of course, there remains political uncertainty. And like it below says, it takes around 4 to 6 weeks usually to conduct a legal review, and that makes it very difficult that if the time is not changing, that you will have significant changes to the legal text that has now been proposed. Last time it was 3 weeks, but it was only a date that changed. So usually after a political agreement, it takes 4 to 6 weeks until we see it linguistic checks and then published in the legal journal. So that is a little bit the picture as it is now, and I hope that gave some clarity. And then I think it's now time to look into what actually legally the changes mean.
Yeah, thank you very much, Niels. I think like what you made quite clear is like with EUDR, there is no full certainty with no topic, but apparently like the most likely outcome is that the proposal will be adopted. So now as a next step, we want to understand from Sebastian what the legal implications of this proposal would be.
Okay, so let's start with what would change if the proposal entered into force. There would be a grace period of 6 months for medium and large companies. We will talk about what grace period actually means later. And we would have a postponement for small and micro undertakings. The EUDR would apply to them only by the end of next year, 30th December 2026. For medium and large companies, the EUDR would apply by the end of this year, so 30th December 2025. This would not change. What is also new is a regime for micro and small primary operators. Again, on one of the next slides, we will talk about what this actually is. But there are certain simplifications for those companies. And then I guess the most important change for most of you would be a relief for downstream operators and traders, because those companies are no longer obliged to submit a due diligence statement. What would not change, we can see on the next slide, is, as I already mentioned, the application deadlines. So for medium and large companies, EUDR would apply from December this year. And also, there would be no changes in the content for primary importers, meaning companies importing products into the EU, the first one importing a product into the EU. This company would be considered an importer and an operator under the EUDR, and the requirements stay the same. So if you want to combine this first aspect with the second one, you could say that the proposal doesn't really bring any simplifications or changes for medium and large primary operators, because for those companies, EUDR still applies by the end of this year, and you would still have the more extensive EUDR obligations, meaning you would need to collect geolocation data and you would need to gather information on the legality of the production of the products. I already mentioned the grace period. What does it say? It says that there are no official checks or enforcement until 30th June 2026. The question is, how far does this grace period go? And one of the questions I saw in the Q&A section to this webinar is already asking this. So does the grace period define non-control and sanctions for the first 6 months, or will the first 6 months of activity also be checked in July with the possibility of sanctions? So could it happen that the authorities in July will monitor a company and then find out that there hasn't been complete EUDR compliance within the first 6 months, and therefore levy a fine? Well, we don't know 100%, because this is not clear in the draft, and hopefully there will be some explanations of the EU Commission in an update of the FAQ. My assumption would be that the authorities are not that strict, meaning, let's say you as an operator would need to implement the position of an EUDR compliance officer, and you did this in April 2026, and then in July the authorities control you and they find out, okay, you started to have this position of a compliance officer only in April, but not in January, or not as of 30th December 2025. My assumption would be that they say, well, you have it now, and this is no reason to levy a fine, but we don't know 100%. So it could happen, let's say, if it is obvious that it's hasn't been implemented in the company yet, and it was on purpose that the company did not implement certain aspects of the EUDR because they said, well, we won't do it until 1st of July 2026. From our perspective, it could happen that there will be fines, because otherwise this would be a postponement and not a grace period. If you say, well, you don't have to do anything in the first 6 months of 2026, and we will not look at this, then you could also say we postpone it by 6 months, but it's not called a postponement, it's called a grace period. And another important aspect to mention in the context of the grace period is that our assumption currently, as long as this is not clarified in FAQs of the EU Commission, is that no official checks or enforcement refer to the for the relevant authorities for the authorities basically controlling the EUDR national authorities, but not customs, because when you look at the wording of the Commission proposal, it said that national authorities will not do checks or enforcement. But when you look at the text of the EUDR, there's always the text speaks of national authorities and custom authorities. So there are those two kind of authorities in the text of the EUDR, and now the new proposal only says the national authorities, they won't do any checks. But customs might start working already by the end of this year. What would this mean? So if you are an operator importing products to the EU, then you would be a company that also under the new Commission proposal would need to submit a due diligence statement, because you're the first in line. And if the grace period only refers to the national periods, then it could happen that customs would ask you by the end of this year, 30th December 2025, when you try to import products to the EU's, where is the due diligence statement? And then perhaps no national authority will do any controls or enforcement, but still customs already starts working. Again, we don't know 100%. Maybe there will be some clarification so that also custom authorities won't do anything until 30th of June 2026. But right now, we would read the draft as that the customs authorities, they start looking at deliveries into the EU, whether they are EUDR relevant and whether they are accompanied by a due diligence statement as of 30th December 2025. So maybe we can go to the next slide and talk about two aspects we already mentioned. One is the new classification of micro and small primary operators. So who are micro and small primary operators? It's an operator that must not exceed 2 of the 3 criteria you can see on in the left column here, in the first column, which is 4 million euro balance sheet, 8 million net turnover, and less than 50 full-time equivalents employees. There are some member states where the thresholds are different because this has been transposed into national law. So in Germany, for example, it's 6 million, 12 million. If you are below those thresholds in 2 of those 3 criteria, then you would be considered a micro and small company. So this is basically the first requirement. If you are above those thresholds, then this new classification wouldn't apply to you at all. But if you are below the thresholds, then you could be considered a micro and small company. Then you would still need to fulfill the operational criteria, which you can see here in the left column. So you must be an operator who basically puts EUDR relevant products on the EUDR market for the first time. That's the definition of an operator. But not only that, you would also need to grow, harvest, or produce the products yourself. So if you are a micro and small company importing products from outside the EU, then again, this new expression, micro and small primary operator, doesn't apply to you. So it would be necessary that you basically grow the products within the EU yourself. And you would also need to be seated in a low-risk country, which is, of course, the case if you are seated in the EU, at least for now, because when you look at the benchmarking system, then the EU member states are low-risk countries. So why has this new classification been introduced? This is especially for EU farmers, which of course opposed EUDR obligations because it's a new set of obligations, and they say, well, it doesn't make sense at all that this regulation applies to us because we don't commit any deforestation. We are located in the EU and everything is regulated already. So why do we have to fulfill all those obligations? So with this expression, micro and small primary operators, those companies have it a little bit easier. Why? Because they only need to submit a simplified due diligence statement. They don't have to include in the due diligence statement the GPS data, but basically just postal codes. It's a one-time submission of this due diligence statement only, not all the time they place products on the EU market, just once you have to do this so that it is clear you are registered, you are a micro and small primary operator, and the authorities know where you're located. So since I guess this is not relevant for most of you, let's go to the next most important simplification of the EU proposal, Commission proposal, which affects downstream operators and traders. I already mentioned that those companies shall no longer be obliged to submit a due diligence statement. What they are still obliged to is to collect information of who is the supplier and who is the customer. So you should collect the names of your suppliers and your customers, and you should also have to forward the reference number of basically the original due diligence statement from the first company that placed the product on the EU market down the supply chain. So what would change? Rather than every company in the supply chain submitting their own due diligence statement, there is only one due diligence statement submitted at the beginning of the supply chain in the EU, and this due diligence statement is then forwarded down the supply chain. And this is still an obligation also for the traders and downstream operators. And you also have to keep this information for 5 years. This, of course, causes certain problems, and this is according to our experience or the feeling we have right now, that the biggest criticism of this draft of the EU Commission, because this might lead to a situation where a high volume of reference number is transferred down the supply chain, because we don't have a a situation where the companies pool the reference numbers by submitting their own due diligence statement. This could happen right now. A company receives a lot of deliveries, a lot of reference numbers, then manufactures their own products, and for this product submits their own due diligence statement. And this due diligence statement then refers to and contains maybe 100 reference numbers the company received itself. And then only this reference number, this one reference number that contains all the other reference numbers, is forwarded down the supply chain. So you have this pooling, this bundling effect. And with the suggestion of the EU Commission, you wouldn't have that anymore. You have just a huge amount of numbers potentially that is forwarded down the supply chain, and that could grow exponentially because there are more and more products combined and more reference numbers coming together that all have to be forwarded. So this is one aspect that is talked about right now a lot. Another thing, I don't know whether this is by incident or whether this will be clarified also in FAQ. So far, it was clear that by the FAQs, but that traders don't have to do due diligence. Traders and downstream operators, they can basically work with the reference number they receive. They only need to ascertain whether this reference number actually exists. So this was a simplification in the FAQ compared to the text of the EUDR. Now, in the suggested new Article 5, Paragraph 7, the proposal speaks of due diligence obligations in case you have substantiated concerns. And this also refers to traders and downstream operators, which could lead to the situation that, based on the Commission proposal, traders and downstream operators have more obligations with respect to due diligence than under the current version of the EUDR, or the current version of the EUDR with the explanations in the FAQ. Again, this could be something the EU Commission will clarify in an update of the FAQs, but right now the text reads that there could be cases where you get information that a product is not EUDR compliant, that require you to conduct due diligence, which then would be, for example, sending questionnaires, doing assessments of your suppliers. And this is something that would be new, because under the current version, again, this is not necessary anymore. And we don't have this, currently, we don't have this scenario of concerns that trigger a due diligence. So these are some problems we see in the simplifications. There are much more. Maybe we can later on also take a look at your questions. Maybe you have further aspects you found out in the proposal. But that's from my side an overview of what the Commission proposal suggests.
Thank you very much, Sebastian. Now that you outlined the main legal implications, I think many people might doubt or question, what does it now mean in practice? I mean, like, how would these proposed changes actually impact our daily operational processes? And that's where I try to shed some light on and to explore the implications from the operational part of the EUDR compliance projects. And going back to these three main areas, I will actually categorize them vice versa. So we'll start actually with this DBS simplification part, because I think this is the one that has the most impact on the operational path towards EUDR compliance. Then I will briefly talk about what happens when companies are purchasing from micro and small primary operators. And the implications for micro and small primary operators are especially legal. So this was already covered by Sebastian. And last but not least, I'm also going to explain what we suggest companies to do. And now that it seems like it will not be a postponement. So now with the focus on this DDS simplification process, I just want to explain what it means from this operational perspective. And currently it's like this, that we have this current situation where each legal entity, even within an organization, must create its own due diligence statements for every EUDR relevant part for every transaction. Meaning, even within transactions within an organization, companies or the entities still have to generate a due diligence statement in the tracer system under their own name. The EU actually underestimated how many transactions there are that will be EUDR relevant, and they underestimated the amount of DDS that will be generated in the future. And that's why they are doubts that the traces system will be stable enough to cover all of these. Meaning what they did, Sebastian just explained, is that the proposed process is that instead of having one new DDS for every single process, for every single transaction, there will be one original DDS that will be forwarded along the whole supply chain, meaning the importing entity or the entity that is first placing this product on the EU market will create this original DDS, and then it will be forwarded throughout the supply chain. The goal of the EU is to actually reduce the DDS volume in order to improve the stability. But to understand its implications from an operational perspective, I will go through this process in a visualized way. And what we did is that we prepared kind of like a draft or like a scenario of a multi-tier supply chain of EUDR relevant parts within the EU market, because like this is like where the simplification will take place. So it would be like a 4-tier supply chain where we have an EU supplier that is providing an EUDR relevant product to an entity A. Here I have to say the entities could be different companies or different entities within one organization. From an EUDR perspective, it's not a big difference because every entity counts as an own individual company kind of. So for example, entity A could be company A, but could also be like the central warehouse of a bigger organization. From this entity, there are transactions that stay within the EU to entity B, to, for example, a wholesaler or another company B, or also to a non-EU based entity C. And again, these entities will then further distribute to companies or entities in the EU or non-EU, and same for the companies that are outside of the EU. Now, what does it mean? So in this case, we just show what steps like the product can go through within the EU market. Now, from the current situation, I'm going to compare what is currently the situation and what will be in case that the proposal will be adopted. Currently, it's like this, that if the EU supplier sells a product on the EU market to entity A, this supplier has to create an outbound TDS for being able to sell this product. Then the entity A will retrieve this TDS information, which then will become their inbound TDS that they can use for referencing measures. Once the entity A wants to sell this product, for example, on the EU market, or I don't know, transport it to another entity within the organization, it will have to create a new outbound TDS that will reference on the inbound TDS. Now, same gameplay. This TDS will be forwarded to the entity B. This will have it as an inbound TDS. And if entity B wants to forward this product, it has to create a new outbound TDS referencing to the inbound TDS, and so on. This will then be the inbound TDS for the EU retailer. This was like the EU flow. If it's like going outside of the EU, it's in the end the same process. This outbound TDS would be an exporting TDS that is referencing to the supplier inbound TDS. This will become again the inbound TDS for entity C. If entity C wants to sell this product outside of the EU, it doesn't have to do anything anymore. But if it wants to re-import this product into the EU market, it will have to create an import DDS that will again reference to the former export DDS from entity A. So we have always this chain and this mapping of DDS that are just like referencing to an inbound DDS. The problem that the EU then recognized was there are so many DDS that have to be generated, and the EU tracer system won't be stable enough to handle all of this. Meaning what their aim or their objective with this proposal is that all these DDS will be exchanged for just one original DDS. This original DDS will be already, okay, here is missing kind of like one step, because we could say that here the EU supplier already created as an import DDS, for example, but we just like want to show like the same scenarios before. The supplier provides this DDS to entity A. Entity A, when it sells the product, has just to forward this original DDS. Same for entity B. The same gameplay is obviously also when it goes outside of the EU. Then from entity A, it goes towards entity C. From entity C, if it wants to re-import, it goes back towards the EU market. I hope that it makes it quite clear what the implications would be like from this DDS management kind of. But now I also want to showcase or to illustrate what we see as the main advantages, but also challenges in the future. Because what we foresee is that especially for large companies, which very often are not monolith, meaning that they have multiple entities, they have multiple business units and so on. And each legal entity must create its own DDS, meaning it requires very strong systems, but also processes to actually track and manage this DDS throughout the whole organization, especially if we are talking about the aftermarket processes in different industries like the manufacturing and also the automotive industry and so on. And so meaning it's like very difficult to have like this full track and trace, because the single entities have always to trace back when they created what DDS referencing to what inbound DDS. With the new proposed process, this will be somewhat simplified for these multi-entity corporations, because when you use, for example, a centralized data hub or also like a software or something like this, what you will do is that you can always retrieve the existing due diligence statement, so the original DDS, for a specific part number. You do not have to follow it along the supply chain, because you don't have to, mandatorily to say we need it from the entity C, because like it was already the original DDS already passed like an entity B. So you could have like a centralized data hub in your, I don't know, for example, in the central warehouse that is storing all the information, and then all the entities can just like retrieve it from there. This makes it somewhat easier in our opinion. But this is like a very broad and big context, I would say. So we can definitely further elaborate this in the open discussion later, or also in further meetings. What we see though as a big challenge of the new proposal that was also mentioned already by Sebastian is actually that before now in the current situation, companies can aggregate multiple inbound DDS that they get, for example, from multiple suppliers into one outbound DDS. In the future, this will not be possible anymore, because you have to always forward the original DDS. But what does it mean in practice? I'm also going to showcase this based on a visualization to make it a little bit more clearer. So as I said, like the current situation is that a company has, for example, multiple suppliers, could be end suppliers, providing DDS for a specific product. Let's say, I don't know, like let's say these rubber O-rings that are used in multiple industries. For every transaction, or also based on an aggregated cluster, doesn't matter, they will provide as due diligence statements to the company for these O-rings. This DDS will be forwarded to the company. We have an inbound DDS, and what the company can do is that they then reference all these DDS into one outbound DDS, where they aggregate multiple inbound DDS in one outbound DDS to have also a more streamlined process when forwarding their outbound DDS to other entities or also to other customers. This is what's currently possible. I mean, like obviously, like here we lose some traceability or some separation of these transactions, but at least there is a possibility to cluster it, and there's like more flexibility. The future process or the proposal does not allow this anymore, because in the new process, it would look like this, that the supplier sends this due diligence statements to the company, which then equal the outbound DDS, because these are the original DDS that you receive for a part number, for example. And then what you have to do is you have to provide this DDS to all the companies or to all the entities that you provide this product with. It could be that, for example, again, if we have these O-rings that usually are in containers where you get like multiple shipments from your suppliers, you throw all these O-rings into one container, you have no clear separation, you don't know which DDS is actually mapped to which specific O-ring. You would have to actually attach all these DDS to all the entities or to all the customers that you are providing this product with. In general, what we just want to explain here is that obviously this would require new new processes and also new systems in order to cover this. We really hope that there will be more clarity also from the EU regarding this, because this is one of the key challenges that actually arose with the new proposal, and we are quite positive there will be done something in this direction. So this was like about the whole due diligence statement simplification with its downsides and also upsides. What I want now to quickly just like touch base upon is the fact if you as a company are purchasing from a micro or a small company. Because the question here is obviously, is this micro or small company actually the primary operator that places the product on the market? Because if it is such a primary operator, it's quite easy. Then you can say, okay, we just need to get this declaration identifier. It's a one-time thing. We know every single time we purchase from this micro company, we just have to provide this declaration identifier to the competent authority in an audit check. The problem is obviously not all micro or small companies are primary operators, meaning what happens if they are not? Then they also have to provide the original DDS information. And it's mostly an edge case, but what could also happen is that there are micro companies that on the one side provide you with products that they place the first time on the EU market, meaning they are primary operator. There you could use the declaration identifier, but maybe for another share of their products, they are not the primary operator. In this case, for this share of products, they would need to provide the original DDS information. Meaning, in the end, you could not be 100% sure when you purchase part numbers from such as micro company, whether you always can use the declaration identifier or need to retrieve an original DDS information. Obviously, this can also be evaluated and assessed via assessments and should also be done so in order to streamline this process when purchasing from micro companies. So last but not least, regarding the rumors, or what, not really rumors, but the proposal of the EU that there won't be a postponement. What does it mean? I mean, based on our experience actually with from multiple implementation projects and also cross industrial discussions, one thing became quite clear for us. Rather than debating whether the proposal will change, it's rather time to act, because we have only 2 months left until we have to reach the EUDR compliance, and a delay seems rather unlikely, leaving us only with these 2 months to actually achieve EUDR compliance and also complete the key steps. What I wrote down here are actually 4 main steps that I recommend every company to fully succeed until the end of the year, because we are still encountering a lot of challenges in establishing these steps with our customers and so on. And what's like the first step, what's very important is like that you clearly define your internal responsibilities within your company or also across the whole organization. Because we are very often facing the issue that some data is not gathered or some processes are not triggered because the responsibilities are not clearly allocated. As a second step, if you're not very far ahead with the EUDR compliance, what we definitely recommend is identify the most crucial EUDR relevant parts and also suppliers, for example, for keeping up your operations. If you have like some parts that are, for example, like easily to find alternatives for, like I don't know, some packaging material, something like this, then you should like rather focus on other parts that are really crucial and crucial for your operations. As a third step, it's also very important to actually define processes and the data flows for the business continuity, meaning that when in January the law will be entering into application, you already know how to handle all these different processes and so on, and where to retrieve what data and so on, because otherwise you will end in pure chaos. Last but not least, I bring this up in almost every webinar that I host, but it's very important that you prepare also for the submission of DDS in the Traces information system. I bring this up because you can actually look up in Traces what companies are already registered and have also the role as an EUDR operator. And actually, I'm always kind of shocked when I see how many companies are still not registered today. And also in the proposal, it mentioned again that the registration in Traces is mandatory for all EUDR relevant entities, despite the fact whether you have an authorized representative or not. So actually, that's also like from my part on the operational implications. We would now move on to the open discussion. I see that we only have like 11 minutes left until 4 p.m., but I don't know what about you, Niels and Sebastian. I would also have 5 or 10 minutes additionally for answering any questions. And I don't know whether you could already identify maybe some question that you want to tackle first.
Yeah, please go ahead. I already answered 16 questions. There are 7 questions remaining. If you see anything you feel responsible for, please.
Perfect.
Go
And
ahead.
a big thank you for taking the big chunk of the questions.
I mean, if you, I saw there were actually no questions around the politics. I saw one question around the natural rubber versus synthetic rubber. So I can maybe just say something on the basis of my previous experience, and Sebastian, if you know better or know something more up to date, then please correct me. But yeah, here it's in the end there is the FAQ actually addresses this issue of what to do if the rubber is synthetic, but of course it's the same HS code. So how do you make clear to the customs authority that it's synthetic and not in scope? So there is a certain number that needs to be filled out on the form. I think it's I-32 or something, but that can be clarified in the FAQ. But then it's very important.
It's Y 129.
Y129.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then of course it's very important to as well obtain either the material data sheet or a declaration of the supplier that you can actually prove the composition and that it's not that it's not natural, no, that it's synthetic actually, and therefore not in scope. So yeah.
Thank you very much. I think like I can put it on answer live. Okay. In the meantime, also looked into one question. It's quite extensive, but it was like about the relief for downstream operators post like at 3:21 p.m. That it writes like that it would appear that the simplification is to help the trace system, but it does not simplify administration for downstream operators at all. What are our thoughts? I mean, like I mentioned it somewhat in my part after the question was posted. I don't know if it was already answered well enough, but in general, we also see it this way. From the data load of DDS that you have to attach then to a single product, it can exponentially grow. Because if you are using multiple raw materials that are EUDR relevant to produce a new EUDR relevant product, you have to attach all the inbound DDS or the original DDS of the raw materials to this new product, meaning it can really exponentially grow. We also believe that this will be a big challenge for companies to overcome. At the same time, we just see like somewhat a simplification for actually having like from covering like from a data infrastructure when you have a multi-entity corporation. Because now you could like also cover this from a more centralized approach since you do not have to generate own DDS for every single entity of an organization. I hope this covers the question well enough, in addition to what I explained in my part. Okay. I don't like then I would like go chronologically. I see like the first question was about what happens if a good is purchased from an SME operator and then exported for own use at entities outside of EU. I mean, what do you mean with an SME operator? Is it meant like as a micro or small undertaking or as a small or medium sized? Because in general, if you are purchasing something from a small or medium-sized operator, then obviously they need to have a DDS. In case that you're buying it from a small or micro-sized operator and then export it for own use at entities outside of the EU, within this new proposal, since it's like a micro-sized operator, you would only have to provide this declaration identifier to cover the export and nothing more than that. I don't know if you have to add anything to that, Sebastian, but I think this covers the question quite from a legal perspective.
Yeah, sorry, I wasn't listening because I'm answering another question, but let me also try to then read some of the questions. Maybe that's better than just providing a written answer.
Okay. Actually, I would take another question. It's like the
Yeah.
the second one at 324. So do you have information about the code that should be used for raw materials finished goods that are placed on the market after the deadline, but using forest harvested before the deadline, before there's an obligation to register within EU trace system? I mean, I guess what you mean with this question is especially when this raw materials or finished goods were already placed on the EU market before the deadline, because then we are still in this transitional period. And in that case, the EU already mentioned that they will provide like a dummy DDS that can be used for these products. So far, there is no tariff code for it, what was actually even lobbied for. But with this dummy DDS, it should be covered. We don't have any information on this dummy DDS yet, but we expect it.
Yeah, maybe one more clarification on the, I think on the rubber again, and this was a reference to the IMDS system, so which is the system used in the automotive sector. So what the thing is that of course the guidance or the FAQ in this case provides you an interpretation of how can you fulfill the law. So it is not a full legal document. I don't think the FAQ is referring to the IMDS because it's very sector specific, but it's referring to the bill of materials note. So if you have an IMDS extract, then that probably will already help you quite far. If you get, of course, more documentation, a declaration from your supplier is always better. But yeah.
Exactly. Maybe the next question that I've seen from Sam at 351. So the original DDS number generated will be logged in a trace information system by the first person, or the first entity, I would call it. And then when sold to the customer, the same DDS number will need to be logged in a trace information system by the customer as well. I truly do not believe that it needs to be generated again like logged into the traces system. You only generate this due diligence, this original DDS once in traces, which is like the portal for the generation of DDS. And then this DDS reference number has just to put within the documentation that you share with your customers, so that in case there is like a compliance audit, they will see, okay, this is the underlying DDS, and they can audit it. Okay, I think so. One very quick question: will you share a recording of the webinar? Yes, we will share both the slides as well as the webinar. And I think, Sebastian, maybe a question for you, because like you mentioned it in your part, in general, again, about the downstream operators, what the implications are. I think like from the questions from Tore and also at 353 are especially about this, whether, because it's not fully clear what the obligations will be.
Lifted, yeah, whether the due diligence obligation will be lifted. So for downstream operators and for traders, due to the existing FAQ, currently there is no real due diligence obligation. So due diligence in the sense of looking at your supplier and verifying whether he is EUDR compliant or not with a questionnaire or an audit and so on. So the EU Commission in their current FAQ said, well, the law speaks of you as a trader have to ascertain that your supplier did everything right, but by ascertain, you don't have to do due diligence, you just have to collect the reference number of the supplier and then enter it in the EU information system and verify whether the number actually exists. And if the number exists, that's already enough for your due diligence. Now, with the new proposal, this obligation to enter any reference numbers into the traces system would be obsolete. You don't have to do this anymore because there is no obligation to submit due diligence statements, meaning you don't have to reference any reference numbers you received. But, and I mentioned this before, the proposal also contains a new Article 5, paragraph 7. And there it is said that if, in the case of substantiated concerns, downstream operators and traders shall verify that due diligence was exercised and no or only a negligible risk was found. So this reads like there might be cases where a trader or a downstream operator still has due diligence obligations, but only in those cases of substantiated concern. So this is something new, which is not defined yet. It sounds a little bit like the plausible information in the CSDDD. So if you receive information, let's say from an NGO that tells you, well, we have proof that the products you received from your supplier are not EUDR compliant. Then this could trigger a due diligence obligation under this new proposal, so that you would need to ask your supplier, hey, what have you done to ensure EUDR compliance? Can you confirm that your products are EUDR compliant and so on? But that's basically the only case. Beside that, there is no general due diligence obligations for downstream operators and traders.
Very good. Thank you very much for this extensive answer. I hope this answered the questions that were posed. One further question arose regarding the TERI code Y129 that excludes products based on a specific composition. It asks whether when products is only used for synthetic, so the TERI code is only used for synthetic rubber in raw form, not for produced parts though. Well, if you have a derived product that is only EUDR relevant due to the rubber within this product, and you can, and it's like 100% of this rubber is synthetic rubber, then the Y129 TERI code also counts for this derived product, obviously.
Yeah, and maybe another one is to confirm that the amendments don't affect the annex with regard to the packaging. No, so if something is just a wooden pallet that is used to import something, then it's not subject to the regulation. Of course, if you would import a lot of wooden pallets as a good, then you would be in scope. But packaging of something else is not in scope.
Exactly, nothing changed regarding this point. Actually, looking at the time, we're already 2 minutes overdue. I think I would wrap it up, unless you want to take one last question, Sebastian or Niels. Otherwise, I would just suggest that we will answer those last 5 questions afterwards and send it with the recording and the slides. Amazing. I will take this as a yes. So from my side, I think it was a very informative and good webinar. And first of all, I want to thank you, Sebastian, and also Niels for participating and for sharing very interesting insights on what we can expect from the EU going forward, and also obviously on the legal implications of this proposal. I really hope that we could shed some light for the participants of this webinar on this topic. And obviously, if there are any further questions, always feel free to reach out to any of us. Niels, Sebastian, do you want to make any final remarks before I completely wrap it up and make like a last statement?
No, I think you will do it very well. So please, it's last words are up to you.
Yeah,
Okay,
maybe I can just say one final thing that so it will be I think this week and especially next week will of course be quite important to follow, so that we really know how what the positioning is of the member states and the parliament, and then we have probably a bit more certainty around when we really have full certainty now. But for now, we have a good idea of what is the most likely scenario to work with.
Perfect. And thank you very much for that, Niels. I think, like the biggest challenge when planning, or the biggest enemy of planning, is obviously uncertainty. So it's very important to keep this in mind. As we already mentioned beforehand, obviously, like with EUDR, anything could change, but we definitely expect that the proposal in such a similar form will definitely be enabled. And that's why we also wanted to explain what are the legal implications and also what would be the operational implications. What we just want to also explain is that really looks like that we won't have a further postponement, and that the EUDR will be entering into application in the end of this year. This is only 2 months left, especially based on my experience with various implementation projects, but also talking to various stakeholders of the industries. I would say that many parties are not fully prepared for that. This means really that there is no time to plan anymore, or to hope for a further delay or expectation. Actually, the time to act is the latest now. And that's what we also want to give you on the way. If you have any further questions, always feel free to reach out to the three of us. If you have any legal questions, obviously to Sebastian. If you want to understand how softwares can tackle these challenges, then to me, or I don't know, if you have any also related questions to Niels. But with that, I would wrap it up, and thank you again all for the participation, and wish you a wonderful afternoon.